So I also am a meditation teacher and have done a lot of trauma-related work as well, and I'm excited to be able to share some of those practices and information with you today. And I will have the rest of our team introduce themselves as well. Renee, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Renee Cadzo. I'm the chair and associate professor of the Health Administration and Public Health Department at D'Youville College. I'm also the board co-chair of Connect, and I work as a trainer and evaluator with Connect as well. And I've got a history of research in stress, social support, community well-being, all from an anthropological perspective. Looking forward to being with you all today.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Go ahead, Sherman.
You sure?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, okay, cool. What's up, everybody? I'm Sherman Webb Middlebrooks. I'm on the board of Connect. I'm founder of the WIN Initiative, which stands for We're Improving Now. It's a small community organization focused on capturing and amplifying youth and community voice in the city of Buffalo, with particular focus on communities of color. I'm also a full-time caseworker in Longview, work with young people who've experienced foster care. Just an overall youth and community advocate here in the city of Buffalo. Really just looking forward to sharing and creating a wonderful space with you all today.
Everyone, my name is Nicole Rodriguez. As other people had shared, we all wear very many hats. I'm a community health worker, a licensed master social worker, and also the executive director and founder of Little People's Victory, a holistic life coaching consulting company. I'm here today as a trainer with Connect, and looking forward to talking a little bit more about trauma and how to connect it with cultural competencies.
Great, thank you, team. So Kristen, if you can help us by pulling up our slide deck. What our format will be today is we'll share some slides and some resources, kind of some working definitions. For some people, this might be reviews. For some people, it may be new things, but we want to make sure that we have some general kind of working definitions. And again, we'll share the slide deck afterwards as well, so that you'll have these afterwards. We're also going to do some polling to get some feedback from this large group. And this way, I wish we could go around and do introductions from everybody. But as Kristen said before, feel free to add your name in organization in the chat there. But we'll try to find other ways with the larger group to have some feedback. So we'll spend the front end here going through the slides, and then we'll do some breakout sessions so that there's an opportunity for dialogue and kind of reflecting on what you're experiencing right now and reactions to the content that we've presented. And then we'll have an opportunity to kind of report back and process that too. So that's sort of what our format is for the day and for the session together. And I'm gonna have Kristen move to the next slide. So we want to make sure that we're starting off just by kind of grounding the space. I appreciate that Kristen gave her own introduction and reminded us where we are, and we're on Haudenosaunee land. And we want to just kind of ground ourselves too, coming into the space where we're dealing with some important topics. I'm really glad that so many people have come into the space, and we hope to learn together. So these are some difficult topics, but there's a lot of resiliency and growth and amazing work happening too. So we just want to kind of get grounded in our desire today to learn together and to heal and to grow and to find ways that we can move through this current time as well as what the future might look like. So I just want to invite folks to kind of relax, participate today in a way that you feel is comfortable. I appreciate Kristen giving us the intro in the beginning. If you just take a moment to check in with yourself and notice how you feel, and if you need something to just meet your basic physical needs, if you're hot, if you're cold, if you're thirsty, if you're hungry, please make sure that you're comfortable during the session today. We love to see your faces, but if you just want to listen and don't want to share your screen or don't want us to see you, you don't have to. So really everything that we do today, we're going to try to be practicing trauma-informed principles, and one of those is safety and choice. So we want to invite you to do everything that we're doing today, and not have you feel pressured in any way. So just check in with yourself and make sure that you're comfortable and ready to participate. And I'm going to share a poem that I wrote back in the end of March, a couple weeks into the pandemic. That's been part of my healing practice, is just to try to write and to find different ways to express myself as well. So this poem is called Celebration in the Pandemic. Celebrate the bird you hear singing while the dawn is still dark. Celebrate the spring air, the buds on the trees, the crocus and daffodil flowers opening up. Celebrate your lungs, the precious ventilators of your body, clear and strong. Celebrate your sleeping children in their beds, the safe home for you and them to shelter in. Celebrate those you did not realize as so essential, the grocery store and sanitation worker, the mail delivery person, all those in the health and human services, protecting our fragile lives. Celebrate your mother's voice over the phone on her birthday, and each family member and friend, part of your circle of love and support. Celebrate even the fear, the sadness, the grief, the anxiety, the overwhelm, as these too are part of our humanity. Celebrate. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share, and we will move into the next piece of our session. I'm going to pass it over to Sherman for this.
So what's up, everybody? So just want to check in. You know, everybody might be zoomed out. So we're going to try to, you know, make this as refreshing as possible. So before we get started, first of all, like I said, we want to check your temperature and just see how everybody is feeling today. So in the chat box, please feel free to let us know, just on the scale of 1 to 5, just how you're doing today, with 1 not being good, totally burnt out, and 5 being, you know, I'm great and fully self-cared and, you know, ready to show up. And I'm seeing a lot of, okay, I see a 5 from my sister Jill, a couple 4s popping up. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can go into the next session. It's just nice to check in with everybody, see how y'all doing before we get started. I mean, just being trauma informed, we don't just want to throw information at folks. You know, like I said, we want to check your temperature, make sure everybody's doing well today. And if you're not doing well, as Jess said, make sure you're doing what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Thanks, Sherman, and thanks everybody. And a lot of times when we're doing that, and again, you know, trying to give you some practices that you can use with your own teams or groups that you're working with. So whoever you might work with, or even if you're just having an individual conversation, that's an easy kind of low risk way to check in with people and see how they're doing. You know, a lot of times we just go through the motion. How you doing? I'm fine. I've had some people saying to me lately, no, how are you really doing? So just kind of giving permission to share honestly and authentically. And, you know, especially for folks with trauma, if people don't want to jump right into talking about feelings, or there may be some trust issues there, saying, you know, how's your day going on a scale of 1 to 5, can be an easy way to engage, and also just do a temperature check with a group in particular that you're working with, or even if you're just having a one-on-one conversation. So feel free to go back and practice that if you don't do it already. I know we have some people who are restorative practice facilitators and do that type of thing already, and there's lots of different ways to do check-ins. But do make sure that you do check in again, first with yourself and then with others before you jump into the work that you need to do. So here's some of our high-level objectives for today's session. We're going to introduce, if this is a new topic, or provide reminders if some of this content is familiar to you, on principles and practices of trauma-informed care and cultural competency. We'll provide opportunities to check in with ourselves and each other, which we've already started to do a little bit, and then allow for dialogue and interactive learning around these topics. We can go to the next slide.
And so, oftentimes, whether you're attending a training, you know, whether it's a Zoom training or training in person, back in the real world, that place we left a couple months ago, folks just jump right in and don't really ask the audience what they want to learn and what they want to get out of the session. But this session is really about the participants. It's about the people who decide to take the time out of the day to join us on this call. So that we really want to ensure that you're walking away feeling as though you participated in a fruitful space. So with that said, we want to just hear from everybody once again in the chat box. What do you want to learn today? And not only that, how do you want to learn? And also any ground rules. I think one of the things that we like to do whenever we're engaging in a new space with people, we want to kind of set the terms, set the expectations for what we're all going to get out of this situation. Because I just think that it's important to have some level of destination so you can navigate the waters per se. So what do you want to learn in terms of trauma-informed care and in terms of healing? And how do you want to learn that? What are different methods that's worked for you in the past? What are some things that you struggle with? And not only do we want to share some of the things that's worked for us, but really sharing that kind of communal environment where the participants on the call are able to kind of share and learn from each other. So please feel free to share, like I said, the things that are working for you, the things that are posing challenges to you, because no one person has all the answers, but together as a collective, we can, you know, create that space that we all need and that environment that we all need.
So folks, like Sherman said, you can add anything in the chat in terms of, you know, why you came today, what are you curious about, and if that's content, if that's, you know, how do you want to be in the space today, and any ground rules that you think are important. So you can add those in the chat, or you can speak up as well if you want to share verbally. So we'll give folks just a couple minutes to do that. And Renee has posted those prompts in the chat so that they're easy to refer to. And Kristen, if you want to help us manage the chat here and maybe read off some of the things that people are sharing as they add them, that would be great.
Yep, it looks like some folks are really interested in tips and ideas on how to work with students in Head Start when they reopen. Some folks are really interested in finding a good way to share these techniques with staff who might not have social work backgrounds. Some folks really want to do support when they're doing outreach to families and students. I imagine both in schools and then outside of schools. Just lifting up some of the ground rules that people have identified, validating everyone's feelings, having compassion, taking time to listen to other folks, hearing from people what's working for them. So seeing if other people have some other experience as well. Similar questions about supporting staff and students. Special populations like students with special needs and some families who might have questions around that. A lot of questions about students. Some more ground rules, best intentions and no judgments. Looking place to start. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, as I'm looking through the chat too, I really think that it's wonderful. Yeah, I know the birdies, baby. We're gonna feed them after this call. But I think that it's wonderful that people are not only looking for strategies to not only help themselves through this time going forward, so thinking out into the future, but also in the moment, but also their organization and the people that they serve. A lot of us work in the service industry, and so when you're giving so much and you're pouring out, it's always nice to look for methods to fill up your cup so that way you can pour into others. But also, I'm seeing a lot of people looking for ways to fill up their own cups in order to sustain themselves. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing in the chat box.
Great, thanks folks for sharing. That gives us a little bit of context. We try to be flexible and adaptable and just pick up on cues from folks. It's been a big transition for us, as I'm sure it has for many of you, to be doing this on an online platform, but still trying to use our trauma-informed care and cultural competency types of principles and practices in whatever space we come into. And giving folks an opportunity to give feedback is really important in that way. So again, this is something that you can do back in the work that you are doing when you engage with folks, whatever type of setting that you might be working in. making sure that you understand what the other person that you're working with's agenda is, not just your own agenda, because sometimes we jump right in. So whenever we have that interaction, making sure that we check with that individual, that family, that community that we're working with. What is your intention? What do you want to learn? How do you want to learn? How do you learn? What ground rules should we establish? What does that look like? Is really important from a trauma-informed community and cultural competency perspective. All right, we can go on to the next slide.
And so, keeping with that, to really get right to the heart of our discussion, we have a poll up there on the screen. So the first question in our poll is disparities in race, culture, disparities in race, culture, and personal backgrounds can be overcome by high quality care programs and or services. And if you agree with that statement, please, or disagree or neutral or not sure, please enter your response in the chat box, which is also followed by our second question in our poll, which states, with hard work and dedication, most people can overcome a difficult childhood to be healthy and successful. So please, whether you agree, disagree, neutral, or not sure, please enter your response as we enter the heart of our discussion.
So we'll just give folks a minute to participate in those poll questions. These are anonymous, and then we'll post the results and see kind of how the group feels in relation to these two statements. No right or wrong answers here. How are we doing on participation, Kristen? A good showing? Almost ready to close the poll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 5 more seconds and then we'll post the results.
Okay, so it seems like about 58% of us, more than half, are neutral or not sure as to whether disparities in race, culture, and personal backgrounds can be overcome by high quality care programs and their services. And it seems, okay, pretty split even, just leaning more towards more people being neutral or not sure, with regards to whether hard work and dedication, most people can overcome a difficult childhood to be healthy and successful. So we really appreciate you guys all participating in this poll. Normally we do this by a show of hands and getting folks moving around the room, but we thank you all for accommodating us on this poll on Zoom. So thank you.
So just want, before we move on to the next section, anyone have any feedback in terms of why they chose the answer that they chose? We had pretty even splits across the different options. So anyone willing to weigh in either with the chat or verbally on why they chose the selection that they did, or how they felt about kind of having to make a selection?
Hi, good morning. My name is Ashley Elliott. I'm with the Buffalo Public Schools. I'm currently working on becoming an administrator in the Buffalo Public Schools, and I just want to really focus on statement number 2 and why I disagreed with that. And I kind of had to think about that for a little while, but I think that in light of COVID and everything that's kind of been reflective of my life as an African-American woman, I think it's hard to say that with hard work and dedication that most people can overcome a difficult childhood. I'd like to think that, you know, in a perfect world that would be the case. But unfortunately, there are just some traumas that are unbearable, I think, for my community particularly, that they just don't ever see that light at the end of the tunnel. And so that's kind of why I went with the disagree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for really shedding light on that. I really appreciate that. Just really illustrating the fact that it's a generational thing, and it's not going to be an overnight thing. Nobody got us into the situation overnight, and we're not going to find ourselves out of this situation overnight. So I think really just continuing to be that light ourselves, and continuing to be present and transparent with those people in our communities, especially the young people who are looking up to us. So I commend you personally for making yourself present as part of that light.
Thank you.
We have some other people who've weighed in the chat here. Some folks also agreeing with Ashley there, and then also statement 1, I disagree with the statement, racism is cultural and systemic against Black people. Sorry, I just lost that with other people in the chat. So different folks weighing in terms of lots of different variables that are affecting people's efficacy and way of working. So different ways to kind of view these questions. And Rebecca saying, absolutely, I don't like the pull oneself up by the bootstraps believers. So it seems like folks are interpreting this in different ways. And again, we had a lot of neutral and not sure types of things, lots of different variables that can impact. Accessibility is a huge factor. So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to the issues that are related to these statements, and we really appreciate people weighing in. And again, you know, asking these questions and providing some opportunity for critical thinking and reflective space, not in a way to judge folks, but just to kind of see where people are at can be really important. And again, a trauma-informed type of principle and practice. All right, so we're going to move into talking a little bit about trauma specifically, and we're going to have Nicolodita talk about that.
Great, so we can move on to the next slide. All right, so I've seen almost everybody in the comments really mentioned a lot about trauma. So just to kind of ground us in a common understanding of what is trauma. Here we have it, it's an event or a series of events that causes a great deal of stress. So that stress can be felt either mentally, physically, emotionally. It can be an acute, which is like a single event, or a chronic or ongoing event like we're seeing now with this pandemic. And it operates on a variety of different levels. So it's not just on an individual level, it's not just within one family, but it really operates within individuals, families, communities, and on racial and historical levels as well. And it's commonly marked by a sense of horror, helplessness, or a threat of serious injury or death. Another great analogy that I've heard used for trauma is that it also affects everybody differently. So just to keep in mind that if we are dealing with a trauma that's existing within a community, it's going to look very differently with each member and within each family and each individual within that family as well. So trauma-informed care is really shifting from, is a paradigm shift of shifting from this idea of what is wrong with you to what happened to you. And so when we do that, we erase a lot of things. And I think what was brought up with some of the questions before is this feeling of shame and guilt, and that sense of hopelessness, and all of those really overwhelming feelings that one feels when they're really stressed or having to deal with chronic stressors. And so we are really shifting to what happened to you and dealing with those stressors instead. And so really important to mention are these basic principles of trauma-informed care. In typical trauma-informed care trainings, we really go over 5 basic principles, which are just very much lacking the connection to cultural competency, and as well as historical trauma and gender roles as well. So here we really are pulling in the safety, trust, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, and choice. And then again, the cultural, historical, and gender issues as well. So just saying that any care that we are giving should really be rooted in these principles. We should always be providing care that offers a safe environment, that is really making us feel trusting of one another and within our space, that really feels supported by our peers, where we can collaborate with one another, and it's not just this top-down approach. We're really empowering and building in choice, and then we're also maintaining this lens that there has been ongoing historical traumas and ongoing traumas within gender and class issues as well. Okay. So while we are continuing amidst the pandemic and also just in general, it's really important to take note of how we are feeling, the symptoms that we may be experiencing. And so here we have listed some symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And I just wanted to highlight that this is not only, a lot of people, when they hear post-traumatic stress, they automatically link it to post-traumatic stress disorder. So we can experience symptoms regardless if we have a diagnosable condition or not. And so a lot of these symptoms, like reliving, so those are flashback nightmares, extreme physical reactions to the reminder of this traumatic event or experience, avoidance, where we're just going to stay away from anything and everything that reminds us of that trauma or brings up those same similar feelings, an increased arousal. So when we're hyper alert, we're overly alert, we are always on the lookout for something to happen, kind of constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop. And we can see this in a variety of ways, especially in our kids. We have huge emotional outbursts, irritability, just really a lot of agitation. And then other symptoms as well. So, I mean, it could be anything ranging from panic attacks to increased depression, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, or just like not caring at all. This like apathetic nature also can come up as well. And so right now we see a lot of that in a lot of ourselves, but also in a lot of our children or a lot of our community members as well. And so just kind of to ground us in the fact to remember that we are all dealing with an ongoing trauma right now. And so we also may be experiencing some of these symptoms as well.
So to continue with that and some of the background about trauma and what it does to our bodies, I think it helps to frame those symptoms that Nicolita just lifted up in the context of what our body's stress response is. So many of you know that when you're stressed out by something that, like an acute stressor, something that startles you, or something that, you know, like you're being chased by a bear in the woods, right? Which is not a likely occurrence, but you would fight, you would flee, or you might freeze. And those are our body's natural responses to fear, to stress. And you have things that happen in your body, physiological responses that cause you to do those things. When you think about that fight or flight, those are those constant alertness, that kind of being constantly vigilant. That's your body constantly doing that when you're chronically stressed. When you think about being apathetic, that might be kind of your body's way of sort of freezing or fleeing in a chronic way, right? So all of these things have outcomes both in the types of behaviors that people who have experienced trauma have, and the types of health conditions that often result from being traumatized or experiencing trauma. So to put this in context, the research has shown that folks who have experienced trauma are more likely to become alcoholic, are more likely to develop sexually transmitted disease. And when you think about these things, don't just connect them to the behaviors that are associated with them, but your actual body and your body's response to stress. So you might have a compromised immune system that leaves you more vulnerable to a sexually transmitted disease, for example. More likely to inject drugs, use antidepressant medications, be absent from work, smoke, have serious job problems, experience depression, and 15 times more likely to commit suicide. So when we look at this in this context, we recognize, well, we already likely knew the importance of trauma. We can really see the health outcomes that are experienced as a result of trauma and its impact on our society and the health of our society at large. Can you go to the next slide? So nationally, we know that more than 46%, so almost half of US youth have experienced at least one type of adverse childhood experience. So these are, the acronym for this is ACE, and this is coming from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, which was a national study, and I believe it's also been implemented internationally, which measures the experience of 12 different adverse childhood experiences. And these range from the experience of abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, different types of things like that. And at least 20% of children have experienced at least 2 of these. Now, the initial studies, I encourage you to watch a TED Talk by Nadine Burke-Harris, who's the Surgeon General of California now, and a pediatrician and researcher on adverse childhood experiences. And she'll share with you in that TED Talk that the initial studies for this were among middle class, mostly white folk. So we're not talking about folks that we know typically that we see in the media have experienced trauma. We're talking about the general population. And we know that then trauma is intersectional with race and with income and with different life experiences that people have had. So if we know that a national sample, it's 46% of US youth, we can know that that's disproportionately felt by people in different communities. So if we look right here in the Buffalo Public Schools, which I know that there's a number of folks here representing us from the Buffalo Public Schools, we know that the experience of children, at least as of 2017, 2019 data is not yet out, that at least 1/3 of the children have had a parent or adult in their home swear at them, insult them, or put them down. Almost 1/3 have seen someone get shot, stabbed, or beaten in their neighborhood. 1 in 5 has lived with someone who is depressed or mentally ill. Again, 1 in almost 4 has lived with someone who is an alcoholic, problem drinker, used illegal street drugs, took prescription drugs, or was a problem gambler. So these addictive behaviors that are tied to physiological conditions. And then 11% have had a parent or adult in their home often hit, beat, or kick or physically hurt them. So as we see these statistics, maybe it rings true, maybe it's mind-boggling, but in whatever direction it affects you, we know that it's an issue that needs to be dealt with, and that has ramifications for society.
Thank you, Dr. Renee. So we're going to take this up a next level to thinking about community, racial, and historical trauma. I know we've had a couple folks already weigh in on this topic in the chat. So this trauma oftentimes is not just on an individual level or even a family level. It really does manifest on a community, racial, and historical level as well. So we know that these things are very real and can become intergenerational, just like poverty and the other unjust situations in our society are. So this is a graphic here that talks about not just adverse childhood experiences, but adverse community experiences. So thinking about equitable opportunities in terms of education and economics, what does that do to create intergenerational poverty and long-term unemployment, lack of business and jobs, and disinvestment? That's an actual very real poverty, and we know that people of color and low-income folks have been, disproportionately impacted by that. This country, if you live in this country, you have intergenerational trauma because this is a country that has a history of genocide and slavery, oppression of women, etc. So we know that whether you were a perpetuator of trauma or you're a victim of trauma, there's those types of issues that have impacted us historically across the spectrum. We can also think about this in terms of people in place where there's dangerous or unhealthy spaces, there's crumbling infrastructure, and again, those issues go back historically to why things are the way they are and how you can determine things like health status and life expectancy by zip code. And then people, in terms of what this does in terms of damaging social relationships. We're human beings, we're social creatures. I think we're seeing this now more than ever in the pandemic. And so what happens when people are in survival mode? What happens when you're constantly in a state of fight and flight and you can't trust folks, or you've been a victim of abuse? It really does break down the social infrastructure, and then we have lower sense of efficacy and that we can change things, right? So even our political and social infrastructure, the trauma at that community, racial, and historical level can really have deep level impacts that go beyond just individual trauma. So we want to make sure that we're lifting that up, and here's where the intersection with cultural competency really comes in and is so critically important, that we're not just thinking about this on an individual level. That is important as well, and there's significant issues there. But how do we expand this out so we're thinking about it on a broader level, and it's not just a matter of fixing or healing one person. We have to really have a contextual frame when we're thinking about trauma and healing. Next slide, please. So cultural competency, and we're always mindful about language here, where you know, we can't ever be fully trauma informed unless, you know, we're walking in the other person's shoes. And same thing with cultural competency. So even though the language here is a little bit of a misnomer, a lot of times we'll use the frame of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But just for a frame of reference, because I know a lot of people are familiar with this term, cultural competency being a defined set of values and principles that demonstrate behaviors, attitudes, policies, and structures that enable organizations to work effectively and cross-culturally. So if we're thinking about this in terms of organizations, where you work, you know, how might you be doing this? How might you value diversity, conduct self-assessment, manage dynamics of difference, acquire and institutionalize cultural knowledge, and adapt to diversity in the cultural context of the communities that you serve? So again, just a working definition in some ways that we might be thinking about in the places where we work, in our organizations, in our departments. How do we do these things to intersect the trauma-informed frame with cultural competency? Next slide, please. And then this is a graphic from SAMHSA that kind of gives a visual of a continuum of cultural competency. So at the low end, we've got that cultural destructiveness, right? So back to those dynamics that we have historically in this country around things like genocide and slavery, and even the dynamics that we're dealing with right now around, you know, police brutality and inequities around the COVID pandemic. So what are those forced types of things, the overt racism and things like that, where we know that that's culturally destructive, and probably most folks on this call, I would hope, know that that's wrong, that's generally not socially acceptable. As we move up, a lot of times people will say, you know, well, I don't see color, things like that, right? So I treat everybody the same. Some of those questions we asked in the beginning were around that, right? If everyone kind of gets the same resources, you should be able to get the same outcome, right? So it's that belief and inequality. But we know that things don't pan out like that, as many of you have already shared. So when we're moving up towards cultural competence and cultural proficiency, we're really working to recognize differences and how they manifest on individual and collective level. So we're making sure that as we're making decisions, we're including people who are directly impacted. And we constantly change, right? Because the environment around us is changing, and we're getting feedback, and we're making sure that we're always doing things with people and not to people. So that's the continuum of cultural competency that we're really striving towards, and you'll see that there's an arrow there because that work is always ongoing. Next slide, please.
And so just want to remember, because a lot of us have, you know, really been focusing on maintaining our own mental health and well-being, maintaining our own family's mental health and well-being, in addition to the work that we do. And as I mentioned before, a lot of us do a work of service to the community. And so just want to make sure that we're holding space for secondary and vicarious traumas, along with compassion fatigue. So these signs are like similar to burnout and trauma responses. I know me personally, just doing a lot of work with a lot of young people in the same kind of environment. Sometimes it feels like you may have heard it before, you've been through this before, but in reality, nothing is ever the same. And so you got to give each situation the credit that it deserves, and the attention that it deserves for the nuances that it presents. So just be aware of just how you need time and space for yourself. Those around you need time and space. And so just give consideration to that, and make sure that you're not taking on too much. And just really remember that we're all human at the end of the day, and there's only so much that we can do. So let's not really, like I said, put on too much that we don't need necessarily.
And so also to remember that trauma-informed care and cultural competency are practices on an individual, family, community, and historical level. That these are not things that we can just write in a best practices manual and ship it off and hope for the best. These are things that we have to be implementing and doing ourselves as individuals, within our communities, within our families, and really working to build a future with these things in it. So that it is not just a manual, and there you go.
All right, thank you, Nicolita and Sherman. So we're gonna move into some breakout group discussions. I know a lot of folks have been adding in the chat, which is great. Renee has just shared a link to the CDC around some of the data that we're talking about. And again, we'll share some more of these pieces if you're really interested in digging into the research a bit more. We do know that even though there is a ton of research, that folks know what's actually happening in communities and in their lives. So based on what we've talked about here, kind of some of these working definitions around trauma, cultural competency, how this manifests on an individual, family, community, historical, racial level, and thinking about the current time that we're in, where, you know, I keep saying, like, these things are not new, but I do think the COVID pandemic has laid bare some of them. And we know that things like, you know, a lot of the work that we do at Connect and as community health workers is in the schools, for example, or with families. And so it's a whole new level where families are, you know, not in school and not receiving those supports. And so just knowing that people are struggling right now, many of us are probably struggling right now, and we want to give some space to have some conversation. So we have a couple of questions here. We're going to move into breakout rooms in just a second. And if you haven't done this before in a Zoom call, you'll kind of automatically be split into 4 rooms. So one of our facilitators will be in each of those rooms to help guide the discussion. And we're going to talk for, I think we have enough time for about a half hour of discussion. And we're going to discuss a little bit about what traumas are you seeing show up right now on an individual level. And that could be, you know, other people that you're interacting with individually or your own self, family and community level. And then what can be done on an individual and collective level to promote healing? So the trauma and being trauma informed is one thing. We don't want to stay stuck in that place, and we don't want to, you know, treat folks and communities like they're broken. There is so much opportunity for healing and for resiliency and for growth, and we see that as practitioners all the time. Many of us have been through that ourselves in our own healing process. So we want to also have some discussion about what can we do individually and collectively to promote that healing and growth, to really be trauma informed and more culturally competent in our communities. So Kristen, do you have any directions or things to add before we move into breakout rooms, or Nicole that may be helping to facilitate breakout rooms as well?
It'll assign it automatically, and it'll just take me an extra minute to put one of the facilitators in each of the rooms. So it should pop up on your screen to join a breakout room.
Okay, so in just a moment, as soon as we start that, you'll get a prompt to join a room. So just go ahead and accept that prompt. And then either Kristen or Nicole will be back in kind of the waiting room session. So if you have an issue at all, you can go back there and they can help you troubleshoot. Or if you're not assigned, there'll still be somebody in that main section. And then they'll give us a warning when that's kind of closing out, but you'll have a facilitator in that breakout room, and then we'll be back in a half hour, and we'll all come back to debrief as a large group. So enjoy your breakout discussions. We'll have about 10 more minutes together here to share back out with those discussions, and then we'll hang on a little bit after 1:30 for Q&A if you have any other final questions that you want answered before you sign off today.
I think there's just a couple more folks.
All right. Okay. Everybody is coming back in. Welcome back. Hope everybody had rich and interesting conversation. I know that my group did. So we're just gonna quickly report out in terms of some of the things that came up in terms of what are some of the traumas that you're seeing show up now, and then what are ways that we can continue to be trauma-informed, culturally competent, and work on healing and resiliency. So in our group, we talked a lot about kind of the community level types of things. We talked about some of the issues around things like unemployment and poverty issues that people had to deal with, and asking for help in ways that many had not had to do before. The issues around Wi-Fi and connectivity, since we're depending so much on staying connected in that way, and some folks not having access, being something that is very difficult. And then in terms of some of the traumas that we're experiencing right now, you know, some of the deaths recently related to police violence, and how difficult it is, the ways that we need to, you know, talk to our men and boys in particular about how to protect themselves when they're moving around in community, and that showing up with trauma and triggers can be literally deadly, and what people have to do to carry that around, and how difficult it is not to be able to gather in town halls and in ways that we would normally do so. Also, the fact that people are being told to stay at home, and some people are not safe at home, and that we want to make sure that some of the protections that have been put in place during the COVID pandemic stay, right? There should have been some of these protections in the first place. So those were some of the issues that we talked about that were challenging. And then we didn't have as much time to talk about healing and resiliency, but the couple folks that shared said it really well, that we have to just stay in courageous conversation and create more spaces like this to be able to stay open, and also make sure that we're including folks that are directly impacted, in particular youth, making sure that young people and students, they're the next generation and part of our healing, so we need to give them a platform as well. So that was my group. Nicola, Alicia, you want to report out about your group?
Sure. So we also talked a lot about community, and in different communities, and how different communities, like, we all started from a different vantage point. And so a lot of the existing traumas have now just been exaggerated even more with the ongoing pandemic. And so we talked about issues regarding mental health and burnout, issues around access to care, as well as access to basic necessities, how our supports have changed or have been eliminated in a lot of ways, especially with new mothers, birthing mothers, and just this, and also huge on the job loss and job insecurity. And then when we were able to shift more towards a healing and resilience perspective, we talked a lot about how a lot of this work is already being done on a community level. And a lot of us are trying to implement it on an individual level as well, as far as having more compassion for each other, understanding that, you know, we're all going through something, that we are trying to create more spaces like this where we have peer support, and also stepping up and starting to care for ourselves and checking in with ourselves before we're overextending to other people. And then also but bringing in people with more selective skill sets to really do a lot more of the healing work. I think that was it. Oh, and then there was also last mentioned, we said really just this push, the need to start talking to our elected officials about offering accessible mental health supports as well.
Great, thank you so much. Renee, you want to report out on your group?
Sure. So a lot of the same themes seem to be resonating across the groups. We had a number of educators in our group too. So we had issues related to mental health, anxiety, depression, the feeling of isolation, and much like Nicolita's group, isolation among new moms, and who normally would have a community around them to help with those first few weeks. The financial loss and the loss of meaning that kind of goes with that, loss of security as well as loss of purpose, access to internet, some food insecurity, the absence of resources for parents with special needs kids. So oftentimes they have a number of children in the house, and it's more difficult to get the children to engage with teletherapy, if that's even available at all. And the whole issue of balancing work and managing multiple children. then in terms of what can be done to promote healing, we talked a lot, similarly to other groups, about establishing a shared humanity and sense of vulnerability, empathizing with folks, listening to folks, reaching out, checking in, doing some home visits safely to bring food or other resources, providing families with outlets for their mental and physical health, and again, making sure we are healthy. So doing some of those activities together with your core group, with your staff, and that sometimes has that trickle out effect. And then also we talked about needing to make sure that there were funds available both to support people. So ideas like universal basic income was raised, as well as money to support the efforts that are needed by schools for counselors and school psychologists. There's risk of these being cut, and the need now is more than ever, and we've just highlighted all of those needs. So trying to protect those funds. And then continuing to do these types of trainings and professional development. It was even mentioned that this is often more efficient to do it this way than in person. So maybe some silver lining to this experience.
Great, thank you so much. And last but not least, Team Sherman.
Yeah, so we had a really great discussion. Folks, in terms of like what they're going through and experience, shared the experiences of the refugee community during this time, and how already vulnerable population is now even more vulnerable just due to just everything that's going on in the media. And so that was highlighted. Also, one of our participants shared a story about a young man who was living in her home, who was on the front lines and who ended up contracting COVID, and just the struggles and what that vicarious trauma feels like when you want to provide love and support, but you really can't physically. And so how do you work around that? She gave him a blanket that she hugged 1,000 times because she couldn't hug him. So those kinds of just ways to just work around the system and continue to create those moments. We also talked a little bit about families who aren't safe at home as well, those who may be experiencing domestic violence, and the young people who are growing up in those households, and also what it's going to look like in the future. When we go back to engaging with our communities, is we have some youth service providers. So what is going to look like when we start talking to our young people, and the challenges that trying to talk to them via these phones and stuff presents when you really can't see under the mask, and get that sense of, reading the room and their energy. So we talked a little bit about that. And then we also talked lastly about the media and the vicarious trauma it can impose on our lives, just as far as just monitoring what we ingest in terms of mentally. So we had a discussion there, and in terms of solutions, we really talked a lot about just being there for each other, cooking, being more intentional with the things that we do with our daily lives, making every day be more meaningful, and just trying to engage with our neighbors, walking the dogs, things like that. Just those sorts of things. So we had a very fruitful discussion.
Great, thank you so much. One of the things that was shared by the wise Miss Denise Barr in our group that seemed to resonate with everybody was this whole analogy of we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat, right? And I think a lot of this has to do with that. We have to remember everyone is having some sort of collective experience, but sometimes vastly different circumstances. So part of that discussion in our group was, we see these celebrities that are in their homes with all these resources, and it's kind of easy for them to stay at home. It's a lot easier than a lot of folks that we're serving, and just remembering all the different types of experiences that people are going through, and that, some people may be in a cruise ship in a very lovely environment, and some people may be in a boat that's falling apart in the middle of a hurricane. And that's really what trauma-informed approaches are about, right? Remembering that everyone's going through their own stuff, and to be compassionate towards ourselves and others. And some parts of it are really difficult and challenging to practice, but the core of it is really quite simple. And I hear so much of the principles and practices of trauma-informed care being shared in my group discussion and in the other group discussions too. So we know this intuitively, we just need to create more space for conversation and for vulnerability. So I really appreciate everybody helping us to co-create this space and to collaborate, to provide the type of peer support, because I know the majority of you are doing this work in community on some level. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. We do have other opportunities to engage. Kristen can talk again about some of the things that are happening through Buffalo Commons and Partnership for the Public Good. And then Connect and the Peace, Love, and Power Collective is providing ongoing supports around trauma-informed practice, and then specifically also around self-care and burnout prevention. So I know some people were really lifting that piece up. It's been important for our particular team to make sure that we're engaging in those practices. And we do have some funding right now that's available for frontline workers and organizations to get a free session on trauma, but more specifically on self-care and burnout prevention. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can contact us. We'll send these slides and some additional resources out to all participants, and there'll be some continued opportunities for engagement. And again, just want to remind people to share these principles and practices when we're talking about, you know, what's happening with reopening, what it will look like to support families and others. Make sure that we're asking those questions. You know, how can we be more trauma informed? What do you think that people who are directly impacted are experiencing? And the more we do that, the more we're going to have a trauma informed community. So I see some folks posting in the chat. If there's anything else that we can answer or address before you leave, we'll hang on for a few more minutes to do so. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. And any last housekeeping things before we formally close, Kristen? No? Okay. People are asking, are you being shared the PowerPoint through email? Yes, well, so we'll email this out to everybody that participated because you registered. We have your email, so we'll send the slide deck as well as some additional resources and upcoming opportunities. And then we'll make sure that you have contact information if you have follow-up questions as well. So any last questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll hang on here for a few more minutes, or if you have a question that you want to ask our team here before you sign off, we'll stay on for a few more minutes. And anyone else, please enjoy the rest of your day. Stay healthy, stay safe, take care of yourself, take care of each other and our community, and thank you. All right, anyone that's still on here that has a question that they wanted to ask? Or Kristen, is there any questions in the chat here that we need to answer?
Doesn't look like there's any questions yet.
All right, so anyone here that's still hanging on and that has a question that wants to ask it verbally? Looks like most people are signing off.
Yeah.
Yeah.